This will be a very short introduction. Why is that? Do we not have a celebrated and very well-known and entertaining speaker? Yes, we do. The reason for the short introduction is that you're all sitting in front of your screens, anxious to hear Doc's talk, and you don't want to hear me bubble along. So let's jump right into it. Doc, the word is yours, please.
Hey, thanks, Jan. And greetings, everyone, from Stockholm. This is, of course, the epicenter of the zombie apocalypse. Basically, nobody here is wearing masks, and basically, I haven't seen any masks on anyone since this thing started. Don't know if it's herd immunity, if that's working, or if it's the summer heat, or if everyone's drinking Donald Trump's bleach remedy, but the daily deaths are basically at zero for now. And even though I had corona myself and tested positive for antibodies, the biggest development for me since this pandemic started is that I became a YouTuber. When my teenage kids ask me something, I like to say, are you asking me as your dad, or are you asking me as a YouTuber? I try to work it into conversations when their friends are around as well. Now, maybe some of you have seen some of my videos. If not, you have some catching up to do. There's a lot of great material there. But today what I wanted to do is weave some of that together and give it some new perspective as well. So let me start this way. Think of a national park. Imagine that once the land was declared a national park, people built some hotels and restaurants near the entry, and the only support organization that the park handled was for marketing, and they created a visitor center. There were no park rangers, no biologists checking to make sure that the plants and the animals were being protected. No one was responsible for building or maintaining hiking trails. No one collected money for the entry to the park. Basically, it was a giant free-for-all Wild West setup. Now imagine another national park just an hour away. They collected entry fees. They even allowed online booking so you can drive straight in. They monitor and protect the nature and the wildlife. They build and maintain beautiful trails. There's plenty of nice toilets and garbage cans everywhere. Plus the rangers are around to enforce the regulations. There are strict guidelines where hotels and restaurants can be built, and they need to keep a low profile so they blend in with the nature in a very tasteful way. So my question is, which park is going to earn the most money in the short term and in the long term? It's pretty obvious, right? I mean, when we create a national park, we're basically saying this is a special place worth protecting and worth visiting. When we create a destination, we just say, hey, come and visit. We do almost nothing to protect the experience. You know, we need stewards to protect the destination for generations to come. If it's worth protecting, if it's worth creating, it's worth protecting. There are many of you out there who work in hotels, resorts, tours, airlines, museums, and you would be correct if you're thinking, hey, we protect our experience. And you do. You have exactly the right thinking when visitors are with you. But now we have to extend that same smart thinking beyond your front door. Imagine a city with 100 amazing museums, but no toilets and no place to eat. Like, it doesn't work. It all has to hold together. When a visitor comes, their experience is from when they get off the plane or out of the thing, not that hotel and the restaurant that happens to them. If it doesn't work, if that level drops when they're inside your establishment to when they're in the city, that's no good. That's a fail. In fact, if the quality of the city is really high in terms of its offer to visitors, the service, if there's no overcrowding, then the hotels and restaurants and tours can all charge more. Now, Iceland passed their Individual Transferable Quota Fisheries Act in 1990. And by imposing quotas, the amount of total fish they can catch, and reducing it, they made fishing not only sustainable, but they all made more money doing it. In other words, less is more. Same with the Apple Store. If you've ever been inside an Apple Store, you'll notice there's plenty of space. They don't jam it full of products. Yet the Apple Store is consistently the most sales per square meter of any retailer. Less is more. Another way of looking at it is saying they found their sweet spot, right? So if we only use marketing and only rewarding the metric of more visitors, it's impossible to ever hit that sweet spot. We're going to just zip right past it. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, if you want to get someplace in your car, you can't just use the gas pedal. You need to pump the brakes every now and then as well. And by slowing down at the right time, you can protect yourself and get where you want to go faster. Even traffic lights, I mean, stopping traffic on purpose and regulating it helps traffic go faster and helps people get where they want to go faster. Even though no one likes to stop at traffic lights and it feels like a total waste of time while you're sitting there stopped in traffic, you're going to get where you want to go quicker. Now, from a tourism perspective, everyone wins in the long run if we hit the brakes with some smart regulation. The problem is we don't have any brakes. To build brakes, we need a new budget, which means we need politicians to get involved and learn about this and put some money aside for it. If they do, they will earn more money from tourism and preserve their tourist offer for many, many more years in the future. But if politicians aren't involved, who's going to tell them? The DMO? They're trying to, grow their own budget or keep it alive. Plus, they're getting maybe a bonus or keeping their jobs if they grow visitor numbers. Why on earth would they march into the politician's office and ask for an entirely new organization that's going to push against them and limit visitors? Again, why would they fight for a new organization to limit visitors when their whole job is to bring in more visitors? So one of the first things we need to do is redefine success. It can't just be more visitors. Even from a financial standpoint alone, many places are seeing their visitor numbers increase, but the total revenue or the tourism percentage of GDP is dropping. I think we need to redefine success in such a way that DMOs will actually want to push for this new management organization because they'll benefit from it. So we could redefine success in tourism in a number of ways. Here's one. What if we start really protecting the key assets of a destination? The reefs, the beaches, the nature, the water, the beautiful architectural buildings everyone's getting their photos taken in front of. This is often what attracts the visitor. So let's protect these things and really make them shine. 2, let's maximize the local economic benefit. So in many places, tourists outnumber locals in peak season. That means they are using the lion's share of water and electricity, and also filling up landfills and sewage treatment facilities and requiring more street cleaning. That means there are serious costs with tourism that are not getting factored into the equation. You can't really tell the value of a visitor if we don't look at total profit. So if we put economic impact first, that can help with some key decision making. If, let's say, roughly 16% of revenue from international hotel chains goes to their corporate headquarters and never even enters your destination, maybe we should consider a different tax rate for them, considering locally owned hotels. If 12% of revenue from Airbnb goes to the Airbnb company and the rest stays in the local economy, if it's a local owner, that's one thing. If it's a foreign owned property, 0% stays in the local economy. If we're prioritizing local economic impact, then maybe locals who rent their properties should be getting taxed at a much lower rate than foreigners, or else no money stays from that entire experience. Number 3, it's got to work for locals. If you want to use tourism to lift the quality of life, you don't want to be dragging it down. And that's exactly what's happening. What's the point of living amazing cities around the world if locals can't even get into the restaurants and have tourists marching around outside their homes taking photos? It's annoying, it's frustrating, and almost none of us would want to put up with tour buses parked outside our homes every day. 4, and the last point, we need to keep the quality high. And that means developing new experience, which gives people a reason to return, and keeping the service level high. Most destinations do little or nothing to lift the service of the entire destination. It's not really part of their mandate. In fact, it's not part of their mandate at all. And for most, because there's no department of new development, they're basically saying, hey, we have the same stuff we've had for 30 years, but please come back. Destinations need to start thinking like a theme park. A theme park would never, ever allow in 200,000 people at once. They know how many they can handle. They know if they need more toilets, or they know if they need more ticket booths or more restaurants. They monitor the queuing. They train their employees for service. They add new rides every year or two. They give people a reason to return. They don't just market a reason to return, they give people a reason to return. And theme parks could never do this if they only had a marketing department. Apple wouldn't sell many products if they only had a marketing department. This isn't rocket science. We need to get the right politicians on board and get a management organization started. And I don't think it works so well to have a marketing department that also just says, oh, now we're also doing management, to become a DMMO. To work properly, it needs to have a firewall, like church and state, or advertising and editorial. There needs to be a healthy balance of power between these organizations. Barcelona has this. Their tourism management office is on the other side of town from their tourism marketing office. Because you can't expect the same people who are getting, say, a bonus to bring in more visitors also be trying to stop visitors from coming. There has to be this kind of natural pushback. And once you have some limits, once you figure out how many visitors the destination can hold, and that's not just the entire destination, but a carrying capacity in different parts of the destination as well, then everything else starts to fall into place. Because this means overall carrying capacity to enforce these limitations, there are all sorts of tools that are now at your disposal. You can get a better digitalization experience to sell the destination. You can add more perks without them getting overused or overcrowded. For example, let's say you decide to put in free lockers or free leg massagers or free, they have these little cabins you can get into that blow dry you if you're in a destination that gets a lot of rain. Excuse me. All sorts of things that you can do, but they don't work if they immediately get overcrowded. So you can also monitor movement, visitors, the behavior of visitors. And if it's run by the city in a secure way that protects the anonymity and doesn't just hand it over to a company with corporate interests, then you can use the data to make improvements, live time incentives to spread out visitors and make the entire destination more convenient so that there's no waiting for anything. All attractions will be booked like restaurants with a timed reservation. You book a specific time and you walk right in. People pay in advance for these things. If they can connect it to their room key, for example, which is not technically difficult, it doesn't even feel like spending. That's why casinos make you change your money to chips and that hotels let you sign your drinks to your room. It encourages more spending. Another part of the puzzle is a new way of looking at how we handle accommodation. The hotel model has high fixed costs, but a lot of peaks and valleys throughout the year. And the short-term rental market has grown explosively. It's organic, it can handle the peaks and valleys well, but it could use some smart regulation. What about a smart solution for putting these things together, finally? In fact, let me just show you with a quick screen share. Can we go to screen share here? You guys ready for that? All right. So this is the rough graph of what the tourist season looks like for the last couple of years. The red line is what it was last year. You can see there's a lot of peaks and valleys. And if you're a hotel, it's tricky, right? So it's sort of like this. Let me go here. So the hotels, let's say, occupy roughly this amount of the occupancy, and then roughly the short-term rentals like Airbnb kind of follow this curve. And this is the current model, how we're doing things. But if we look at this shape, what if we slice this up in a smarter way? If we say, okay, we have a funky shape, we have some people with different needs. What if we say to the hotels, instead of building for the peak season, create enough occupancy for roughly the lower chunk of the season? That way you can handle, you'll be at 89 to 99% occupancy throughout the entire year. You can plan your staffing, your food, and you have all these fixed costs. And this model suits hotels much better. And then you have the short-term rental market, which can open and close apartments easily as are needed. They can adjust easily and absorb these peaks and valleys in a great way. So hotels benefit and they get huge occupancy rates. And the short-term rentals get perhaps more total rentals throughout the year, but they have to open and close and they have to allow themselves to be regulated. It seems like a win-win for both industries. All right, so we're good. Yeah, so in terms of how we look at this whole thing, if we can just come at each step of this with a new direction, that means you need specially trained people, retrained people, and the willingness to sort of understand that when we emerge from this COVID fiasco, that we've actually learned something from the experience. We're just not going to keep applying the exact same thinking that we've been doing all along. We use this downtime well. We understand some of these basics. I hope the stuff that I'm saying here sounds completely like common sense, because that's what it's meant to be. And so what I really want to sort of end by saying is that, you know, in creating a smart and connected destination with a carrying capacity, this is the future of travel. I know we have self-driving cars, and I know we have the Hyperloop, and all these things that are a little bit sexier, but I think the real future of travel is management. It's more sustainable, it's more profitable, it's better for the visitors, it's better for the locals, and the only question for destinations is, what are you waiting for? And the trick of this whole thing is to provide a win-win-win-win, so that the hotels understand this, that they want to get on board, that the tours, that the museums, that the DMO all find a win in this. And I think the very first step in heading down that path is redefining what success means. As long as we cling to more heads in beds, or as long as we cling to more visitors, we're going to continue down this horrible path. So it's really a readjustment of our thinking. Profit, sustainability, local life quality. These are the things that need to be at the core of our decision making, which means we need to start rewriting the master plans for all destinations with this in mind. Because only when we sort of readjust the direction of this slow moving ship are we actually going to get where we want to go. I think we can all agree the same tactics that got us where we are today are definitely not going to take us where we need to be. I know I've been getting a lot of questions as I've been doing these videos, and Jan, I would like you to sort of see if you can chime in, and I wanted to sort of extend on a number of these issues, but I wanted to see if there were any questions already, or if you had a few based on the previous talks that have just occurred before me and throughout the day.
No, I'm fine. I think you should just continue. We have no external questions. People are probably just so fascinated.
Okay. Is there anything that you thought that was want me to touch on a little bit more?
I think it is a discussion which we will have probably in a lot of industries. There's a big scandal in Germany now. When I read the papers, they have the scandal in the meat industry. And it's exactly the same: cheap products, a lot of products, and cheap production, and it's produced in an awful way. And that is a lot of the same you're saying in the tourism business. We need to redefine what is profitability. That's probably the same issue, right?
That's a great point. It's also something that's happened with fast fashion, in that we're designing all these clothes that in relative terms cost almost nothing. They cost almost nothing. I'm getting a bad echo. 1 second, I'm drawing on my volume. They cost almost nothing. And so there are all these costs to the environment, to the shipping costs, the pollution that we're doing with these clothing issues. And we need to get people to just buy less clothing in general. And the exact same thing you're saying about the meat, Jan. So it's a great point. And often, if I remember from my history course, often the same themes extend throughout the entire culture with all sorts of different aspects. We knew that art and music and truth were all relative to that period. And I think we're seeing the same sort of thing here, where we're seeing this less is more theme kind of continuing throughout all these different industries. And we need to start focusing on that in tourism as well. And I think management has become the Wild West. Go ahead, Jan.
I'm laughing because I wrote a blog celebrating the birthday of America in a couple of days. And I had one point saying that the US, great country, but they have a lot of questions where they need to perhaps rethink. One issue is they complain about the trade balance. But when you go to a store, these are packed with cheap stuff in a way you don't see anywhere else. So can cheap stuff be produced in America? No. Answer: China, Pakistan, India, and so forth. So the question which the Americans are discussing a lot, reducing trade imbalances, is actually a question about redefining what are you buying. And that's basically just your discussion again, taking a bit further, right?
Yeah, was there anything I mentioned today that didn't seem to quite make sense that way, or did everything you feel hold together from that same respect?
Perfectly fine. It makes sense.
I always think it's more fun when a dialogue, so I wanted to just sort of pick your brain a little bit as well. as I started to try to map out what of the stuff I want to say, one of the other aspects in terms of management that's not been included in part of the conversation is getting tourists to behave better. So there are all these techniques. What we've done, if you've ever been in any tourist attraction or tourist destination, is you see signs saying, don't take your pictures here, don't eat here, no ice cream there, no shorts inside the church, all these signs that go up telling tourists what we're supposed to do. And there aren't many tourist police around to enforce it, for starters, but they're not terribly effective. You see people eating ice cream right next to the do not eat ice cream signs. And they've now employed some police on the Spanish Steps in Rome to get people to, not these days, but before the pandemic, so that people wouldn't be sitting on the steps. But I think a new line of nudging has occurred, where we can actually have interesting proactive ways to get people to be part of the solution. The island of Palau, of course, did their famous thing where they put a stamp in your passport and ask you to sign a pledge that you will participate in keeping the island pure and clean and doing your part to be sustainable. And so sort of in getting tourists to act better, you can then have more tourists or the same amount of tourists in the same spot without it feeling like such a big burden on the local community. So if we want to start bringing in more visitors or even maintaining the same number of visitors that we have, we need to start thinking this way, that we need to get them to behave better. That means having more people take pledges. That means using some of that great time when people are locked in their seats as they're about to land to show an informational video. We all know how to put on seatbelts, but what we really need to know is how to act properly, to not buy antiquities when we shouldn't be in a place, to not step on coral when we're going to a place that's near the sea. All these things, to use the right suntan lotion so it's not disturbing the sea. All these behaviors that need to be part of kind of a management solution. And the marketing people, they don't want to have to be the bad guy. No one wants to be the bad guy. So we need an entire organization that's kind of, to some extent, like the police, that does all the dirty work that nobody else wants to do. They do these tough management decisions, they figure out the carrying capacity, and they figure out how to enforce some of this stuff, even if it's by nudging or actually having people out there, even if it means having underwater reef wardens patrolling to make sure people aren't stepping on the reef. They need to have some way to make sure that they become the stewards of these destinations so that they have some place to market in the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years. Because the rate we're going now, there may not be a lot left in some of these destinations.
If you want me to pop in, I mean, that's a very valid point, but that's a very, very difficult one. I've lived many years in Berlin, and if you come to Berlin on a Thursday or a Friday, they land in Schönefeld full of people just getting there to drink because it costs half what it costs in the UK. That will be a very tough one, Doug.
Yeah. The other part of the thing is figuring out who you want, and different types of visitors have different impacts on the destination. So let's compare FIT with tour groups for just a moment. We all are familiar with well, I think most of us in the Northern Hemisphere at least are familiar with sort of the wind chill factor. When the wind's blowing, it always felt a bit colder. And then some scientists actually proved it. They found a bag of water hanging in the wind actually froze quicker than when it wasn't in the wind. And they were able to create a mathematical formula that included the wind chill. We were able to do something similar with Olympic diving, where we didn't, otherwise everyone would be doing the same swan dive off the board and getting an easy score for that. So that's why we have this level of difficulty rating, so that they're encouraged to try lots of flips and twists and so forth. We need to apply some kind of a formula like that to tour groups versus FIT. Because when people are in a tour group, they feel the same number of people feel like they take up more space than the same number of FIT people spread over a couple hundred meters walking around on their own. If a tour group with 30 people shows up at once to any restaurant, there's an instant queue of 30 people. If they show up with FIT people over a period of 10 or 15 minutes when they walk into the same restaurant, they all get seated. Most places outside of like cruise ships and theme parks can't handle these groups that just poof, can walk right in like that. It creates obstacles. If 30 people following a tour group leader stop on the sidewalk to listen to the instructions and the historical lesson from that area, they immediately block the entire sidewalk and people have to walk in the street to get around them. They look like tourists. Anyone from 100 meters away can say those are tourists. When it's FIT, some of them look like tourists, but some of them don't. They look like they could be locals, and you don't know, and it has a lower impact. So as we start figuring out carrying capacity, and during peak seasons, if you can, for example, fill up the city with FIT and you don't need the tour groups, you can start charging enough to either drop off or park for tour bus. keep them pushed aside so that hotels are happy because they're full, restaurants are happy, they're full, and they're filled with FIT who are usually spending more. And we need to start making these kind of decisions. And again, these are bad guy decisions, like the bad parent that no one wants to be. This is why you want a separate management office that's handling this stuff. What do you think about that? Does that make sense?
A lot of sense.
Why do you think we don't see it already?
I mean, that's the discussion. The audience doesn't know, but we had an email exchange with some other guys, and what it all boiled down to is we all know what should be done. We just don't implement it. And why don't we implement it? That's because it's damn difficult. It needs to, in order to do that, there's a lot of work to be done. And there's a lot of change in the way we think, which will need to take place.
What would be great is if we could have a conference full of politicians who really care about tourism. Because I think if we can get this to the right ears, we can actually initiate the change that's needed to make this stuff happen. Again, that's why I was sort of using a bit of my presentation to say that when it's just going to the DMO, why would they even bother to take it further? There's no incentive for them to do that. I'm always looking this way, by the way, because you're on my monitor over here. So that explains that. I'm not just trying to show off my profile. What do you think about that? I mean, does that seem to be the bigger issue, that we need to bring more politicians into BUZZ.travel?
I don't know if we need to bring politicians. We need to bring decision makers. I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical about politicians.
Aren't the decision makers politicians?
Yeah, you might be right.
I had a recent phone call in Hawaii.
Yeah.
We did a setup phone call. We're part of this discussion. And I thought that was great. And sometimes I go to conferences where there are quite a large number of politicians, and they always wish there were more. It seems like we need a groundswell of understanding and support for some of these basic changes.
And let's agree, we try to make up a conference with decision makers, then we see to how we want to define decision makers. And we make such a thing here in 3 months' time and see if we can get something in the mindset of people change.
That would be fantastic.
A lot of people, this putting this conference together had been a personal great experience, because I have come to know a lot of people which think in these directions, want to change something, set up a lot of things, change it. So from the platform, there will be a lot of interesting people to support such an initiative. So let's talk about it.
We got a question that came in here from Kate Kenward. If you police the attractions, would that take away from the attraction of travel, or O-travel? You know, to get away from our everyday life and go to these restrictions. Basically, no one likes a bunch of restrictions or police hanging around. Do you really want that on your holiday? How do we figure out a smart way to police that? If I understand the question right. Is that how you understand it?
That's the way I read it, right?
All right, I guess I would say like this: if you do it in a clever enough way, you don't need hardly any police. And when they do walk up, it's done in a very kind of tasteful way. They're not wearing riot gear. They're politely, they've been trained in service. It's similar kind of police or security guard you would run into in Disney. If you throw something on the trash on the floor, they're not going to hit you over the head with a baton. They might ask you to do something. It depends on what the offense is. But the other thing is, let's say we're talking about something major, like getting people to rethink about the sunscreen. Maybe they already bought $50 worth of expensive sunscreen and they're going to a fly and flop holiday. So if they're going someplace that has instituted a new rule that they only want eco-friendly suntan lotion, how do you police that? And I think that's a really interesting one, because it's multi-step. So first you want to email them in advance when they book their ticket, tell them about this and why they're doing it, give them a reminder the day before the flight, and let them know that they're actually going to be they're going to be checking for this stuff and taking it away at the airport, but then maybe giving a credit. So then when they check in, you can remind them then during check-in with the gate agent. During the flight, there's an in-flight video explaining why they're doing this policy, and that when they land, their luggage is going to go through a detector and they're going to see if there's any kind of creams or liquids, and they're going to check for them. And if they're not eco-friendly, they're going to take them away. And depending on how much they've taken away, they'll give them some credit to buy some local eco-friendly lotion. And then when they get to the hotel, they've signed a pledge saying that they're going to only use eco-friendly lotion. And at that point, you can't really have police walking around checking on the beach if people are putting on the right sunscreen, but you've taken enough steps up until that point to try to enforce it. So it depends on the issue.
Another answer to that, Doc. If you take away attraction of traveling, yes, you do that. But if you don't do policing, you take attraction away because you ruin the destinations anyway.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, you can choose. You have to die one way or another, right?
Yeah, it's a sort of same with having the parking meter maids in the US, or people checking, the police doing speed checks. No one likes to get pulled over and given a speeding ticket. No one likes to get a parking ticket. But if no one ever checked this stuff, there'd be the Wild West of parking in every city. We need to have some kind of authority monitoring this so that it keeps order to the whole thing.
Agree.
It's a good question, though. Have any more? Do you have any more?
There's no more questions here right now.
All right. Anything in particular? I mean, you've seen a lot of my videos I've been putting up this summer. Is there anything in particular you want me to touch on?
I mean, destination management in general, as you say, is the hot thing. This policing is an interesting issue, but I don't think that is the real issue. As I said, you have police in a society anyway, one way or another.
Yeah. Also how you sell it. Like Xavier Font, this professor who I was speaking to when I was doing that story, was telling me how one of the more effective ways to reach out to people, for example, the example he had was not to litter in the forest. And they made all the signs for kids. It's like, hey, don't upset the nasty trolls. Make sure you don't throw any of your garbage on the floor of the beautiful forest. And they put it at children's height, because then the kids would remind the parents to behave. And nothing gets the parents to behave better than the kids reminding them to behave properly. So there's all sorts of little tips and tricks that you can do to get people to comply better than just putting up a normal sign.
There's a new science last 10 years developed, behavioral economics. Very interesting to get people to react just not to financial incentives, but to such short things as that.
And I think that's exactly what we're trying to aim for. We're trying to figure out with each step of management that we got to slice this up into a number of different quadrants. So we're looking at, and this is something, there's a town on the west coast of Florida that's doing this, in Sanibel Island, that they have someone, I think her name is Nicole King, who is a full-time service instructor. So she puts on classes every morning, every evening. I think there's 7 or 8 classes in this module, teaching everyone from mini golf to restaurants, hotels, how to give better service. And so permanently trying to lift the service of the entire destination. So you have someone doing that. You have someone working on compliance. You have someone helping with public-private partnerships to get new attractions to keep this destination constantly reinventing itself. And then you've got the management side of stuff with carrying capacity. And then you have once you have that set up, you can also be doing this electronic ticketing. So one of the examples I gave, and we have the technology for this, it'd be so cool to do, is that you could take your room key, which can also be on your mobile phone, which could also be an arm wristband, depending if it's a kid or if you're active, whatever you want to have. And that key to your room could also be the key to your city. You could connect it to the credit card when you're checking your hotel. So now you don't have to go to the complicated subway machine in London or wherever. You just tap your bracelet. And what you can do, and then it's just pay as you go. Or you can have a plan. If they say, well, if you're going to go to more than 2 museums, well, $12 and get this upgraded plan, which includes access to some really nice clean toilets that are around the city, which includes these cell phone chargers, which includes some lockers in the train station. So you've got all these perks that you could have around the city that lifts the visitor experience. And it's all connected. And then you can also sort of get the data from it, which is why I think a city needs to keep control of this. In the same way a city shouldn't hand over their water supply or their electrical grid to Google, they should also keep control of this valuable data and protect everyone's identity. because they'll be able to see when everyone goes to the bathroom and uses a locker and uses a cell phone charger. And they might want to use that data anonymously to offer improvements. But in the wrong hands, that's really creepy Big Brother stuff. I know there already is a lot of creepy Big Brother stuff out there, but I don't know that we need to contribute more to it. But it would be great to turn that key to your room into the key to the city. And we have the technology to do it. Disney, in fact, spent about $1 billion doing just that with their magic bands. If they'd waited about 5 or 10 years, we could have connected the whole thing for a small fraction of that price, which cities can now also do.
Doug, you asked me questions I think would be interesting. We spoke about this implementation. You said one thing would be to make a conference. That, of course, only a small step. What else do we need to do? I mean, there are two sides to the equation. There's the demand side and there's the supply side. Why do people buy cheap meat in Germany? Is that because they offer cheap meat or because they want to save? And that's basically the same with tourism. There are two handles to this, aren't there?
So there's, I guess the easiest way to look at it is best practice. If there's a destination that gets out in front and does all this stuff and shows that it's a huge success, then other people would look at that and say, we need to do that, copy it, and move forward. I think is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but they will need to prove it by making more money for the local tourist companies, right?
And what I've seen looking around is that there's not any single destination that's doing all of this, but there are a number of destinations that are doing little pieces of it. I mean, I think one of the earliest ever was the model of Bhutan. And this goes back 30 years. They said 5,000 people a year, that's our limit. And they were charging them around $200 a day to be there. Now that $200 a day was actually a base amount that was set towards their food and their hotel and their guide. So you didn't have to pay any more than that $200 a day. Although now that they have, Six Senses hotels and all these, $1,000 a night hotels. So in addition to that $200 a day minimum that's applied toward those things, you pay a supplement if you want to upgrade. So they figured out a way to make more money. And also the other thing interesting with Bhutan, they haven't had that limit for like 25 years. It's unlimited numbers of people that could show up today. And many or even most of the people who show up in Bhutan think there's still a limit and that they were lucky to get in. So that they think it was hugely successful to have that limit. Even though they don't do it anymore, they think it was a huge success. And very few people have dared to copy it. You know what's interesting as well is if you look, Jan, if you were to come over to Stockholm, I don't know how things are where you are. If you were to come out to Stockholm here and we were to go out on a Friday or Saturday night, you and I, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and we see that there's no line to get into a popular nightclub. And we go up right to the front. There's a bouncer with a clipboard who looks tough with the tattoos and earpiece. We say we'd like to go in, and he says, you're gonna have to wait. And we're like, come on, man, we know there's nobody inside. He goes, no, you gotta wait. And we're gonna wait there. And as we're waiting there, a bunch of people start queuing up behind us. And there's some really nice looking people behind us. And we're like, okay. And we're waiting and we're like, can we please go in? We're freezing. This is Stockholm. And finally he goes, okay. After 15, 20 minutes, he lets us in. And when we get in, we're like, just like we thought, there's nobody here. But because we've already invested 15 or 20 minutes standing and freezing outside, and because we know there's a queue of people behind who are all waiting to get in, and some of them are pretty cute, we might stay at the bar and have a beer and just wait for these people to fill up the... And the reason they do that is because they tried the other way. They tried that method where they just let us in when we showed up, and we walked in, said, this sucks, there's no one here, and we walked right out. So they have like what the equivalent of a tourist season every single night, where they could experiment by letting us in or not letting us in, playing hard to get, all that kind of stuff. And they found that what was most effective. And with a destination, they're afraid of risking the entire season. And with so many stakeholders, they want to play it safe. But by playing it safe, they're actually doing it wrong and letting too many people in. And that's, I think, what's happening.
That's true of the principles. Scarcity, if something is scarce, people want to have it, right? We can't get in when we want to get in. That's basically the same with Bhutan. We only have a limited number and it costs so much, then everybody want to have it. and social proof. If you see there's a huge line behind us, everybody want to do it then.
Yeah. And they've actually, at bigger theme parks with higher technology and better forecasting, they try to do it, I've been told by insiders, they try to engineer it so that when you walk up to the dates of, say, Universal or Disney, you don't go straight in. It takes 5 or 10 minutes they don't want you to wait for long, but they know that by waiting, it gives you a little anticipation and makes you feel a little extra lucky that you got in the door, that you didn't just waltz straight in.
Sure.
That felt almost too easy. So they like it when there's like an engineered supply-demand issue, and it's not always easy to adjust it to the minute, but that's kind of what they're aiming for. Yeah. And I think the interesting combination for spending, and you probably realize this as well. So let's say that you're going to, let's pick a place, MoMA in New York, and you've booked a time, because let's say they have time ticketed entry, you book a time and it's at 11. And while you're booking that online slot, it says, hey, our average visit is 90 minutes. It looks like you'll be with us during lunch. If you buy a lunch coupon for $15, you're getting 20% off. And by buying that in advance, 2 things happen. 1, the kitchen can order in advance and be smarter with their orders. 2, because you already paid your entrance fee and because you've already paid for your meal, and if we're talking about a family of 5, that's a lot of money. By the time you get to the gift shop and your kid says, hey, Dad, I want a $60 artsy umbrella, you're more likely to reach for your wallet because you haven't just shelled out $150 for entry and a lunch. Yeah. And so there are ways to increase spending by doing things more in advance, by disconnecting it from the actual transfer of funds, especially on that day. And by being smart about it this way, destinations can get a lot more money. And you know who's really good at this? Charter airplanes. If you've ever taken a charter flight to a vacation destination, their typical thing that they do is when you're buying your ticket, they have all these little extra add-ons. The ticket looks really cheap, and then they go, do you want early extras on the airplane? Do you want your baggage to come out first? Do you want to sit by a window or have more leg room? And then the other thing they do is they sell you a meal, and they'll say the meal is $15, but they don't sell you a drink in advance because they know that you're going to have to buy the drink on the plane. And they know that fewer people will buy the meal if they include the drink and make it more expensive. So by dividing it up in a clever way, you can use smart pricing practices and using shoppers' habits. And I don't know if it's sneaky, but you can be smart about it.
I was thinking kind of sneaky. You mentioned Barcelona before, right?
Yeah.
You said they have divided management and marketing into. But Barcelona is, to my view, a very tourist crowded destination.
Yes,
anything wrong?
Yeah, so they've had some issues that are out of their control. So they put a moratorium on new hotel building some years ago, but even the subway extends outside the city limits. So for most visitors, they would just look at the map, a Google map, and they'd book a hotel that was technically outside the city center, where they had put a ban on hotels because they were putting new hotels just outside the city center, which were still part of the same subway or same bus lines. So it was only 10 or 15 minutes to get to the city center. For them, it was like pushing water uphill or herding cats, or whichever analogy you want to use. Every time, and they had no control. It's a national cruise terminal. So they couldn't control and regulate the number of cruise ships that came in or the number of buses that came in on the highways. So the number of controls that they had as just a city were actually quite limited. And that was a big part of their problem. Another part of their problem is illegal rentals on Airbnb. So part of a big chunk of their management office, they have a huge team of people that are patrolling Airbnb and the other short-term rental sites every day, looking for violators, people who are renting without their license. And then they try to fine these people like 80,000 euros. That's like, trying to get water out of a stone. It's supposed to be a big deterrent, but it's not easy to get people to pay it. And so that's part of the problem. And then you need this expensive team of people that's constantly patrolling and trying to get them thrown off the site. What's needed is a better registration system, so that doesn't even happen. If every city had its own short-term rental registration, we could alleviate all that for every city instantly. The problem is you can't have every city with their own registration software solution, because it needs to integrate with all the short-term rentals. Airbnb is not going to integrate with 3,000 different small registration systems. You need one global one. And actually, I've been speaking with a number of the organizations involved in putting something like that together. So fingers crossed, maybe we can make something like that work.
So what would the 5 steps be to implement? I mean, step 1 is we make a conference. Sure, understood.
Yeah.
But what are the steps if we try to get into the dirty stuff and get moving? What would you recommend?
I think the first step, as I was outlining, is just sort of redefining what success is. Because if we keep it as heads and beds, if we keep it as total visitors, then there's no reason for the DMO to push for this new organization. If we define it as local profit, if we define it as sustainability and protecting the key assets and increasing the life quality, or increasing the visitor experience and the local quality of life, if we've redefined that, now it's not a conflict of interest for the DMO to push for this new organization. As it stands now, it's a total conflict of interest because this new organization is going to try to maybe prevent the total number of visitors. Whereas if they redefine it, they'll be in alignment. So I think that's actually one of the first steps. And then, because it would be really nice to have the DMO march this into the politician's office and say, we want a new organization to do some of this dirty work because we don't want to get our hands dirty telling people what they can't do. We want to keep focused on marketing and what we do well. And we need a new organization with a special skill set that's doing this other stuff, that's working on compliance, that's figuring out how to protect and set carrying capacities and so forth. So I think that's sort of the order. And then within that, one of the things you can do for ammunition that new organization would then have to do is do a clever survey. And this can be part of the carrying capacity assessment as well, where you're showing, there's many ways to do it, but one way is you can kind of show pictures of a beach or of a walking street or any part of the city, like 10 different levels of crowds throughout the day. And you can show it to locals as a survey and go, where does this feel too crowded? And you can show it to the tourists. You can show it to both the lower end tourists, the ones who maybe you don't want coming off the tour bus, and the higher end tourists. And see if you can find an agreement of what that right level feels like and start to try to sort of zero in on that. Now, are you ever going to find an exact correct magic number for a city? No, it doesn't exist. But if you try to do it in a smart way, you're going to get a heck of a lot closer than by just letting people do whatever the hell they want. So it's a great step in the right direction. So kind of a survey. And the other thing that can happen in a survey is you're asking key questions. What's important to the locals? And then you can take these answers, give it to the politicians, and serve it back to the stakeholders and go, hey, this stuff's important to the locals and this stuff's important to the tourists. And it's not what we're currently doing. So let's readjust.
As you said before, we need to get politicians involved because there are conflicts of interest between the stakeholders here. The guy in Mallorca having a big hall where people come and drink cheap beer and eat sausages, of course, is interested in keeping up mass tourism, whereas the guy showing the old church or whatever perhaps has another view. And that means the DMO is not the right one to take the shots here. That will be the politician, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever unload a gazillion cruise ship tourists and they buy a bunch of cheap Chinese imported souvenirs into the Caribbean, the souvenirs are imported into the Caribbean, or they other cheap tchotchkes and junk that they get when they, there's always going to be someone who's going to fill that void. But just because they're making money from it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, or that the destination can't make more money if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Because you hear a lot of people saying, what about these guys who are, selling the souvenirs? What happens to them? Well, you could also say, if you start dumping nuclear waste somewhere, you could say some guy's going to make money taking in the nuclear waste. Doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Just because you can earn some money doing something doesn't mean it's the right thing or the smartest thing for the destination as a whole to be doing. And I think we need to make that distinction.
Sure.
That's kind of what's not happening.
So let's start by preparing a conference in a couple of months' time. We have a lot of interesting colleagues here on the platform. We just had Patrick. Jet will be later today. I think he will be a right guy. we had the data guys. I think one is the big strategic picture, where do we want to go? But the other way is, other aspect is to get the data. As you said, we need to measure also what is success. Paul Rogers will be here later today, so we will have an interesting crew with that.
Yeah, I think one thing to think about and to be careful about is some of the stuff I explained about having a room key be the key to the city and all these connected things. That's something that Get Your Guide or Viator or Expedia or Google Travel or some of these big players could, Booking.com could like move in and try to do something like that. And for the DMO to go, hey, we're getting all this done for free and no one, you know, that's a dangerous road, because now you've handed over all your data and essentially the entire development of your destination over to this company that has its own corporate interests with stakeholders and so forth. I think it's vital that cities retain control, that they have some little pieces of this stuff that are farmed out in the same way that like Disney doesn't build all their roller coasters. They bring in other stakeholders to create some of these products. But I mean, I think it's vital that this data is protected and used in a smart way, and not just given out to the highest bidder or I should say the lowest bidder in this case. I think I think some are going to do that, and it's going to be dangerous. Mark my words.
Most likely it will happen. Should we turn off the ending here, or do you have anything else you want to say, Doug?
I think I've gone through almost everything I wanted to say. I wanted to make sure I left enough time so that we could, I always think it's fun. I watch enough of these webinars. I always think it's fun when there's more dialogue and less when there's one person who's just going off on a tangent. So I wanted to make sure we had enough time to chat this way and go back and forth a bit and see if there were any questions.
Doug, you will be around here on the Expo the next couple of days. So people can get in touch if they have anything they wanted to discuss with you, book you for speeches when the time is coming again.
Exactly. I just want to say that I think it's great that you're doing this. It's a fantastic, cool new platform, much needed in the industry. It's every time people get together to share more information, network, only good things happen. So it's great. Hats off.
We have had a very good response. A lot of new members coming in. So that is great. Thank you so much for the chat. We will be in touch one of the next days and see if we can plan a conference here to get the world moving in the right direction. Finally.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much, Jan. Take care. Bye-bye.